Welcome everybody, I am Seven, and I am the DM of 7th Roll, and as you might be able to see on screen right now, we are doing another revision video. This time we're talking about the Barbarian, but before we get into all of that, I do want to kind of introduce this series for people who might not have seen the previous two videos, the previous two class revisions that we did. For people who maybe aren't interested, I am usually putting timestamps in the description, so you can kind of skip ahead through the introduction part, I guess, mostly. Um, but anyway, what is this series? Fairly simply put, for the last couple of months, I have been making videos talking about One D&D, talking about the changes that Wizards has been making to 5th edition for their release, I'm assuming somewhere in 2024. And I've pretty much let it known that I'm currently not extremely happy with these changes. I'm not saying that the last couple of bundles, this is coming out pretty much after bundle 8 has been released. I'm not saying that the changes that they make there are bad, however, the issue kind of remains to me that I'm not a fan of how little they really do with the system. There's a lot of problems in 5th edition that they're not touching. And at a certain point in time, a thought popped into my head. I can keep complaining about 1D&D and the changes and all that jazz, or I can actually just try to make my own thing out of it. And so came the idea to just have some fun, try and make my own version of 1D&D, so to speak. Now, just so you guys know, there are two things that I should mention before we continue this, which is one, as you can see, this is version 0.1. This version is completely untested, completely untried, completely unbalanced. Like, I'm not expecting this to do very well just yet. The idea here is really similarly how programs are being developed in IT. I work in IT, so I kind of know that system a little bit. Pretty much there, what you do is you start with your first version, and every couple of weeks you try to iterate in it, and you have people who give you feedback, and you try to guide it in a little bit of a better way. Um, and that's sort of what I want to do with these revisions as well. So, as I said, this version is just me throwing ideas onto a page. Second thing that I should mention is these bundles are usually based off of the original Player's Handbook version, the 2014 version. This is not like, I'm not taking 1D&D as a base. I'm trying to do the same thing that 1D&D does, so I'm taking the original Player's Handbook and kind of entering my ideas into it. Why is this important? It's important because you are going to see features and ideas from 1D&D, because as I said, it's not like everything's shit in 1D&D. However, it does start from the player's handbook. So, for example, the biggest contender that I usually mention at the start of this is weapon mastery. Weapon mastery is not going to be in here. Most of the glossary changes aren't necessarily going to be in here, although there's one specifically that I think does fit this specific bundle pretty well. Stuff like that. I'm not going to go into why I don't like stuff like weapon mastery and such. But I do want you to know where we're starting. I might at some point do a video talking about weapon mastery, making my own version of it, but at this current point in time, I'm just purely going to be looking at the classes. Alright, that gets us into the Barbarian. Now, before we get to the features themselves, let's talk a little bit about Barbarian and kind of what I currently think the ideas behind it. So there's two things here. One, there's the general creation of classes, right? Which is pretty much what am I trying to do with these classes? And you might have noticed this already in Fighter and especially in Monk. The two big things that I want to change in the 5th edition classes is I want to give players more build variety, allowing them to have more choices in building, and I want to give players the option to have more options during combats. Barbarian for me is one of the worst in those two departments. I actually think Barbarian is a very nicely designed class as a 5th edition class. I think they get the idea across pretty well, but those two portions I feel Barbarian does really bad at. For the building of a Barbarian, the big choices that you really get are at 3, 4, 8, 12, 16, and 19, which is your subclass and your 5 ability score improvements. Right? This was comparable to Monk, where I also feel that was kind of a problem. Fighter slightly mitigates this problem off of having a very clear like strength and dex path, and off of having multiple ability score improvements. Barbarian only has this. And then during combat, I feel Barbarians kind of are stuck with the problem of they can bonus action rage, and then for the rest of combat, it sometimes feels like they're just attacking. And that's it. And of course, I get it. There's a lot of people who are now saying, oh, but you can be original, you can do other stuff, you can make it fun. I get it. But I feel like there should at least be some options in the base class as well. So those are the two things just in general that I'm trying to fix. I'm mentioning them here again because I do think they're very important, because I do feel they are two very big flaws in the Barbarian design. The second thing that I also want to talk about is I've now done 3 classes. This is the 3rd class revision, and you might have noticed that those 3 classes are what originally Wizards in 1D&D called the Warrior class group when we were still working with class groups, right? That was Fighter, Monk, and Barbarian. Now, all 3 of these are, in a lot of cases, kind of the frontline fighters, the ones that go up front, have ways, have a lot of hit points, have ways to mitigate damage, stuff like that. They're usually, quote-unquote, the tanks for as far as characters can be tanks in 5th edition. But each of them does kind of have their own flair, right? Monk has the lowest hit die amongst the 3 classes, has on average the lowest amount of hit points because they prefer putting stats into Dex and Wisdom. And because of that, Monk to me feels more like a class that works on mitigating damage and trying to get hit as little as possible, right? Patient Defense is a good example. Deflect Missiles is a good example. Stuff like that. Fighter is the class that has learned how to fight. They have been taught, they have trained. They are usually like the cliche, like where you're in a keep and you have like 20 guys standing next, 20 guys and gals standing next to one another, and they're like learning the moves one by one. That's Fighter, right? They have a little bit of higher hit points because they also have, you know, training in that department and such. So they have higher hit points than the Monk, usually, I think on average lower hit points than the Barbarian. But that's what Fighter is, right? Because of this, they have all weapons, all armor. They're the only class that you can multi-class into that gets proficiency in all armors, stuff like that. This is also, by the way, why in the previous revision we gave them maneuvers, just base. And then you have Barbarian. Barbarian is the class that I've always explained fights with their gut, fights with their instinct. They fight in the wilderness, they go up to something or someone and they start fighting them. And because of this, I've always imagined them to be the ones who took the most hits, therefore have the highest hit die, therefore on average will have the highest amount of hit points out of the 3 classes that we were talking about. The thing with Barbarian is they are what I would call more of a high risk, high reward class. Because they fight with their instincts, they don't necessarily have the training that a fighter does, or the capabilities with ki and such that a monk does. Yes, I refuse to call it discipline points. And this is one of the reasons why I think Reckless Attack, for example, is a perfect feature for Barbarian, right? But they can take a feature like Reckless Attack. Oh my god, I don't know where that went. Because they have more hit points. They have stuff like Rage, which mitigates a little bit of damage. They can take more hits. And that's really the idea with Barbarian. And I wanted to sort of stick to that idea, right? But at the same time, I wanted to fix the issues from the first part of this Barbarian discussion. So these are the things that I'm kind of trying to take into consideration with Barbarian. I'm going to be honest, I'm probably not there yet. I've changed strangely little currently for Barbarian. There's actually like one big change, and then I feel the rest is like smaller changes. But yeah, let's actually get into it. That might be a little bit more interesting. All right, first of all, I've talked about, oh, I should, by the way, show this. You're already going to see that the table is kind of changed. You're going to see a lot of abilities that literally were there in 2014. You're also going to notice, again, like proficiencies and here the starting class features. I have not touched these yet. I have not touched these in any classes yet. I don't think I currently should. So let's get to the features. Immediately, you're probably going to notice that the level 1 feature has been changed. Now, this is going to be the biggest portion of this video, I'm pretty sure, because this is going to require some explaining. I'm going to be honest. It's a pretty big feature, but I hope it's slightly self-explanatory. Ferocious battle. As a barbarian, you fight with a ferocious nature. This is represented by your ferocity. If you have more ferocity, you are throwing yourself harder into battle, can use additional abilities and powers. However, do not let your primal nature take over too much, or you might not recover in time for the next fight. Pretty much what happens, every barbarian now gets ferocity. Ferocity is a resource. After every long rest, you reset your ferocity to a number equal to your proficiency bonus. This resource is used to fuel abilities and will mostly be gained in combat. You can also reset your ferocity to this number at the end of a short rest, but that is not necessary. So, a couple of things. One, people who have seen the MCDM book called Flea Mortals might recognize where the inspiration from this feature comes from. Yes, this comes from the Bestial Companions from MCDM. I am a very big fan of MCDM. I'm going to completely admit that. And this is actually inspired by their bundle. Honestly, I'm going to be perfectly honest in that. I like their ferocity system, and so I added it here. Second thing, ferocity is a resource, right? And this is just a very general way of how you get your starting ferocity. You always start the day with a number of ferocity points or a number of ferocity equal to your proficiency bonus. Level 1 through 4, 2, 5 through 8, that would be 3, and so on and so forth, usually. Unless you have magic items that increase your proficiency bonus. And what you should also notice is this reset to your proficiency bonus is mandatory when you finished a long rest. It is allowed whenever you finish a short rest. So let's say that before a short rest you were at 1 ferocity and you're level 5, you are allowed to put it back to 3. You don't have to. This also, by the way, works if you have more. If you're at 7 ferocity and you want to take a short rest and put it back down to 3, you can. That's really the general idea behind that. Now, are you only going to get that much ferocity? No, because now we're going to talk about gaining ferocity. Any barbarian can gain ferocity in 2 ways, by attacking or by being attacked. Whenever a barbarian makes an attack roll against an enemy during initiative, they can choose to increase their ferocity by 1. If the attack would be a critical hit, they can choose to increase their ferocity by 2. You can also still increase it by 1. Pretty much you get to pick. The target of this attack must be of a threatening enough nature. You can't bring a bunch of rats with you and let them out of the back whenever you want to gain ferocity. Yes, this is literally ripped off of Flea Mortals because I like the way that Matt explains it there. It's just not explained as well. And then the DM has final say on whether a creature is threatening enough. Usually this is going to mean if your DM puts you into initiative, puts you into like a forced initiative, you can then fight with the enemies and be like, okay, I get ferocity from these attacks. That's usually how it's going to work. I don't want to cut off all avenues, and I will admit that I'm slightly afraid of this feature, mostly off of the fact that you're going to have people who are going to try to abuse this system, right? This is why there's the idea of like the target has to be threatening enough, right? You can then make an argument, what if you attack your friends? You can make that argument. First of all, I as a DM just wouldn't allow that, and second of all, I wouldn't necessarily allow that to give you ferocity even if I allowed the actual attack. You know, it's also, it says an attack roll against an enemy during initiative, so you know, it's a little bit funky, but pretty much the basic idea is if you attack in a situation where you are fearing for your life, you can get ferocity. And then the same thing whenever a barbarian takes damage or fails a save against a hostile effect, they must increase their ferocity by 1. You lose all ferocity if you drop unconscious. So I specifically am saying takes damage and not whenever they are getting attacked. I'm doing this for 2 reasons. One, technically, originally when I just said they could attack, there's actually a small exploit where you have a wizard with 8 strength who just starts unarmed attacking your barbarian and you get infinite ferocity, which is not the idea. You do have to take damage. The amount of damage doesn't matter. And it fails a save. The only thing that I'm slightly afraid of is like things like maybe you can frighten the barbarian for free or something. I'm not sure yet. This is why I'm saying a hostile effect. I would say that a friend's spells and effect don't necessarily trigger this. But pretty much this is how you gain ferocity, right? Now, you might have noticed something. There's nothing in here about what is your maximum ferocity, because that's something that you should mention. That's the thing, there is technically no limit, however, there is something known as a primal limit. So, what is the primal limit? Ferocity can be a valuable resource, but also a dangerous one. Regardless, any barbarian has a primal limit. His limit is usually 10, but it can be increased and decreased with certain abilities. We'll talk about that in a minute. Whenever your ferocity goes over your primal limit, you become primal. And whenever you are primal, you can deal 1 additional damage die of damage on each attack you make in a turn. However, at the end of each of your turns in which you were primal, even if you weren't primal the entire turn, you must make a Constitution saving throw, the DC of which is equal to the highest ferocity you've had this turn. A failure, you take 1 level of exhaustion. You immediately stop being primal if your ferocity becomes equal or less to your primal limits, and your ferocity immediately becomes equal to your primal limits if you are ever primal outside of initiative. Because I don't want you to constantly, like, every 6 seconds have to make a save. Now, what does this mean? As a barbarian, you will constantly be gaining ferocity, right? It goes up, goes down. You can use abilities to spend ferocity, stuff like that. But the basic idea is it will go up and down. But there is a limit where your body, pretty much you can see ferocity as how much you are exerting your body, how much you are focusing on that primal urge that you have been using and training your entire life. But there's a limit. The moment you go over that limit, you start exerting yourself so much that it can have long-term effects on your body. And so you have to make a con save. Now, this is where the big change between the MCDM ferocity system and mine is. In the MCDM one, it's make a wisdom saving throw and then attack the closest creature to you. I didn't want to do that for 2 reasons. One, I didn't want a wisdom save because I feel like con is already a stat that barbarian is usually going to invest in because it determines their AC, determines their hit points, stuff like that. And I feel like I shouldn't force players to also invest in wisdom just for being a barbarian. I don't like that personally. Another example of this that I have is like the Order of the Lycan from Matthew Mercer's Blood Hunter. I'm not actually a fan of the fact that if they're half health, they have to make a wisdom save because that's another stat that they have to invest into. I'm personally not a fan of that. Of course, you know, I'm not saying that that's bad design. I'm just saying personally not a fan. Second of all, I didn't want to be like, now you have to attack the closest enemy, because that once again goes against the philosophy of why I'm building this, right? I want players to have more options. I don't want you to have to be afraid that you're going to have to take a specific action, and therefore you don't want to go primal. So the downside became your body exhausts itself so much that you become exhausted. The only thing that I'm still debating on is the DC of the save. I'm actually thinking whether or not I maybe want to just turn this into flat 20 and then have certain features that you can take to lower it slightly. But that kind of screws you over very much at low level. This also means that the further you go over your primal limits, the higher the DC becomes. I'm still debating it. Currently I'm leaving it at this. I might just turn it into a flat 20 because it'll be easier than, oh, the highest ferocity this turn. You need to start like keeping track of your ferocity. So this is something that I'm still debating. But that's your primal limit. That's the base thing. And then I'm going to add two more things. Primal Teachings. Primal Teachings are pretty much the features of the Barbarian class. Pretty much ferocity can be used and influenced in a number of ways, known as Primal Teachings. I'm not 100% sure I'm happy about all the terminology, I will say that. Primal Teachings is like one that I'm still iffy on. So you learn a number of Primal Teachings, one of which is Rage. I didn't get rid of it, just saying. An ability depicted further down in this ability. You get an additional amount of Primal Teachings depending on the number depicted in the class table. You get 1 at level 1, 2 at level 2, 4 at level 3. You might recognize the numbers here. They are the same as the amount of maneuvers my revised fighter gets. With one exception, Barbarian only gets 1 Primal Teaching at level 1. That's the one difference. The reason for that pretty much being... I'll actually explain once we get to Primal Teachings why it's 1 and not 2-2. I might change this as well, by the way, but anyway. So you get a number of an additional number of Primal Teachings depending on the number depicted in the class table, and then whenever you gain a level in this class, you can replace one with another, base. So that's Primal Teachings. We'll talk about Primal Teachings once I've gone through the features. It's at the end of the class description. Then Rage. Rage is the one Primal Teaching that every Barbarian gets. I didn't want to make this an optional one, because this way I'm also able to... I just think this is a good feature. I don't want to make this an optional one. I can. I don't know if I like that, but anyway. How has Rage changed, however? So, in battle you fight with Primal Ferocity. On your turn you can enter a Rage as a bonus action using 3 points of Ferocity. One thing that you might immediately notice here is that this means that a level 1 through 4 Barbarian technically cannot enter a Rage immediately after a long rest. They have to make an attack or take damage first. Now, however, there's 2 things that I want to say to that. One, I feel like 3 points is a good balance point. And 2, also talks about the Rage as well, and people who are already reading ahead a little bit might have already noticed it. While raging, you gain the following benefits if you aren't wearing heavy armor. You gain advantage on strength checks and saving throws. You have resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. People who looked at the column already probably realized this, but the rage damage is gone. You do not gain additional damage from raging. There's pretty much 2 reasons that I removed this. One, I personally was never really a big fan of the rage damage column and how heavily One D&D was starting to use it in its features, I'm going to be honest. And 2, I've pretty much gotten rid of that one in order to give you these Primal Teachings. There is actually a teaching that literally just gives you additional damage and stuff. So I think this is a pretty fair trade still. So I got rid of that just slightly as like a balancing idea. Other than that, if you're able to cast spells, can't cast them or concentrate on them while raging. Rage lasts as most for 1 minute. At the end of each of your turns, except for the turn when you activate your rage, you must pay 1 point of ferocity or drop your rage. So pretty much, you can only rage for a minute, then you have to reactivate it with 3 points. And you have to pay a point of ferocity every round. This is sort of the replacement of you have to make an attack or take damage every turn. The advantage is if you made an attack and took damage, you can technically rage for 2 turns now. It gives you a little bit more freedom, but it is a resource that you have to pay attention to, because if you can't pay the cost at the end, you lose your rage, right? You don't want that. And I also added, like, you don't have to pay the cost the turn you activate your rage. Reason for that is actually relatively simple. It would have pretty much brought the cost at like turn 1 to 4, which would mean that technically a level 1 through 4 barbarian could not use rage, because they would have to attack, bonus action rage, and it'd be gone at the end of the turn. That's really the reason for that. So that's Ferocious Battle. I'm sorry that it's a pretty long feature, pretty long explanation. But I feel like this is going to be a little bit more interesting, because what this is going to allow you to do is it's going to give you a barbarian who is going to constantly be capable of like looking, how am I doing on ferocity, what features can I use. They have like a little bit more options, and you also have the option, do I want to go balls to the wall, go over my primal limits, get the additional damage increase, but also have the risk of having to drop or get exhaustion. Small thing that I also want to add to this, by the way, which I'm doing at the end because it's not that important. I am probably going to change. I'm probably going to add a glossary if I like start putting these things into one document, and make exhaustion the one that they introduced in one of the One D&D bundles. I think like around bundle 4 or 5, where exhaustion was pretty much you had 10 levels of exhaustion, and each of them was just a -1 to all your d20 rolls. If you had 10 levels of exhaustion, you died. I'm thinking of changing the exhaustion system to that one, because I actually personally like that one a little more. But that's personal preference. So that's Ferocious Battle. Now, as I said, the rest hasn't changed a lot. Unarmored defense is still the same. Your AC is 10 plus your dex plus your con modifier. For people wondering, in Monk, I have currently changed the unarmored defense to strength or dex. Why am I not doing it here? One, barbarians have the option of wearing medium armor, have an easier time of just picking up a feat to get heavy armor, and also they have a shield. So I honestly feel less bad about doing it here. I'm not saying I wouldn't, but I'm also still checking feedback on whether or not the strength change for the monk was even a good change. So have to look into that. Reckless attack. Reckless attack has slightly changed. Starting at second level, throw aside all concern. I kind of changed this to the 1D&D version, so pretty much you can decide to attack recklessly. Doing so gives you advantage on melee weapon attacks using strength until the start of your next turns, but attacks against you have advantage for the same period. So it's pretty much the 1D&D thing. In the original, you had to call it at the start of your turn, and then for the rest of your turn, you would have the advantage. But for example, if you did opportunity attacks or if you held your action, you technically couldn't reckless attack on them. The one thing that I did change, and you might have noticed that, is when you make an attack, you can decide to attack recklessly. The 1D&D version forces you to call reckless at the start of your first attack. I'm personally not a fan of that. I personally prefer the fact that you can choose when you want to start attacking recklessly. In my specific scenario, what you can do is you can make one attack if the enemy, for example, would fall over dead and you move to the next target, and then you want to start attacking recklessly. I want to give you that option, right? There's very niche situations where this, I think, affects it. And there's also, of course, the niche situation that now if you make a reactionary attack, you can actually call reckless on that, and then for a part of the round, maybe you didn't need to take advantage attacks. So it is definitely a buff, but I also think I prefer it this way. I feel like it makes it less, I don't know, it just makes it easier. You don't always have to remember to do it at the start of your turn and predict your entire turn. You can just go reckless at any point you want. Danger sense hasn't changed. You get advantage on dex saves if you're not blind, deafened, or incapacitated, and you can see it. Primal path, your subclass you can choose Path of the Berserker, Path of the Totem Warrior. These are the two that are in the base player's handbook. The third one, because I'm trying to add 3 subclasses to each, is Path of the Zealots. Why Zealots? The only explanation that I have for you is Berserker has a really nice link to Primal Limit. Totem Warrior is nature, and Path of the Zealot is divine. And like, if I'd add a 4th one, I'd probably add Wild Magic. So you have like the 3 types of spellcasting, quote unquote. You have like Arcane, Arcane, Primal, and Divine. That's kind of the explanation, but honestly, Zealot just felt like the one that fit the best here. Honestly, this is just a case of preference, and I figured, you know what, let's put Zealot in there. Ability score improvement still the same, as usual. Extra attack, if you've seen the Fighter and Monk videos, then you know that I have now decided to give everybody 4 attacks at level 17. So you get a 2nd attack at 5, 3rd attack at 11, 4th attack at 17. For people who don't know why I'm doing this, it's very simple. I have always hated the fact that cantrips scaled at 11 and 17, but extra attacks from everything but Fighter didn't. And Fighter got their last attack at 20 for whatever god reason. So yeah, that's extra attack. Fast movements just stay the same. Feral Instinct, I pretty much turned this into the One D&D version, but I'm honestly thinking that I'm going to get rid of it. Maybe keep the advantage, but Instinctive Pounce is just like... I get why it's there, I don't like it, personally. I have kept Brutal Critical, because I don't like the changes that One D&D has made to it. I'm gonna be honest. I've currently kept it. Maybe I'll change it to something else, but I don't know. Relentless Rage, one of my personal favorite features for a Barbarian, pretty much stayed the same. Persistent Rage, I have chosen to stick to the no time limit on your rage. Because I think the One D&D version is stupid. The one difference is there's no time limit on your rage, and you don't have to pay ferocity anymore either. To keep it up, you still have to spend the 3 to activate it. So yeah. Indomitable Might, this has stayed the same. Total score for strength check less than strength score. You can use your score instead of your check. Same thing. And then finally, Primal Champion. This is slightly changed. So what it says now is at 20th level, you embody the power of the wilds. Your constitution score and maximum increased by 4. You can also choose one other stat and increase its score and maximum by 4. So there's a couple of things I want to mention here. One, I am not actually a fan anymore of the level 20 features that I added to Fighter and Monk. Having infinite superiority die and infinite key points feels like a bad idea to me, even though they are overpowered features at level 20. I'm starting to get the sense that maybe it wasn't necessarily the best idea. Primal Champion, however, I think is a decent feature. Right, Barbarian originally had you get a +4 to your con and your strength, and their maximums increases as well. The thing is, you might now have noticed, of course, I've changed it to con increases, but you can choose your other stat. This is something that I'm thinking I'm going to use in multiple classes. And I kind of always want to pick one stat that is going to base be increased. So for Barbarian, it'd be Constitution. For, let's say, Cleric and Druid, it'd probably be Wisdom. Warlock and Sorcerer probably be Charisma, stuff like that, right? But then I want to give you the option on which other stat you want to increase. Because I feel like, again, it gives you a choice that you can make. It gives you a little bit of freedom. And also, stuff that you also have to think about is, at level 20, you usually have a bunch of magic items. If one of those magic items, to give a very dumb example, is a Belt of Storm Giant Strength, which makes the Barbarian Strength 29, why the hell would you want your strength to increase? Because that's literally not going to do anything, right? Your strength is now going to be 24. Yay! That doesn't do anything. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to give you the choice to at least change one of your stats. Because I personally feel that's just better. For example, a barbarian like that can then choose, you know what, I want to increase my dexterity by 4, because that gives me 2 more points of AC, gives me a better dex save, better stealth, I don't know. They can increase their wisdom, if they want to increase their wisdom saving throws, perception, whatever, I don't care. But it gives you a little bit more in terms of choices. That's really the idea. Alright, so that's it for the basic features. I'm going to start by going to the bottom of the document now. So as I said, you get a number of primal teachings. This is just a list that I've kind of quickly come up with. And most of these affect your ferocity in some way. An example is always angry. You only need to spend 2 ferocity in order to go into a rage. Yes, this is a reference to the Hulk. Bloody battle. Whenever you reduce an enemy to 0 hit points, you can gain a number of ferocity equal to your proficiency bonus. Calming spirit. You can lower your ferocity with an amount equal to your proficiency bonus. Divine strike is a specific one for Zealot. Whenever you make an attack, you can spend 2 ferocity to add a d8 points of radiant damage to the attack. And you can take this teaching up to 3 times. Every time you can spend an additional point of ferocity in order to deal an additional 1d8 points of damage. Stuff like that, right? Ferocious prep, you can use your bonus action to increase your ferocity by 1. I think I'm going to change the requirement on this. Be like if you made an attack or something, you can use your bonus action to increase. Stuff like that. There's also, as I said, specific ones for the paths. For example, higher frenzy. While you're in your primal state, you can choose to gain 1 additional ferocity once per turn, as long as you're a path of the Berserker. And then totemic overlap, for example, is you can choose an additional totem ability for totem spirit, aspect to the beast, or totemic attunement. Now, you might have noticed there's a couple ones that I skipped. Specifically, I skipped Brutal Strike, Reckless Crit, and I think those are the 2 big ones. These are reckless attack features. Pretty much, reckless crit is whenever you choose to make reckless attack, you can choose to increase your crit range by 1, but any attack against you also has their crit range increased by 1. I think this is a neat little ability that also adds to the reckless attacks. And the Brutal Strike is actually the one from One D&D, where if you're reckless attacking, you can forego the advantage that you get on your attacks, but you deal an additional 1d10 points of damage, for example. Now, one thing that I want to slightly talk about and think about here, and I'm going to be honest in that, is I'm not sure if I want to put these reckless features here, if I want to put them in the Primal Teachings. I've actually been thinking recently, as I've recorded this, tried to record this a couple of times, of maybe having like reckless attack at level 2, and then at later levels, or even at level 2, have reckless features, where you can pretty much choose upgrades to your reckless attack, sort of have a second list of features, because I don't know if this really fits primal features or the idea behind primal features, right? Because primal features are meant to affect your ferocity, and technically these don't have anything to do with your ferocity, right? They just work on reckless attacks. So that's one thing that I'm still considering. They were also the reason, by the way, in case you're wondering, they were also the reason why you only got 1 primal teaching at 1 and a second one at 2. Because that way you picked your first primal teaching from all of the ones, including the ones for rage, some of them for damage increase, and then at level 2 you technically could have 2 Primal Teachings, which affected your reckless attack. But again, I'm not sure if I am 100% on board with that idea. So I think that's one change that I'm going to push through once we go to version 0.2. So that's Primal Teachings. That's how this works. I don't know, I've probably skipped a couple, like Ferocious Strike. Whenever you make a weapon attack or armed attack while raging, you can choose to spend 1 ferocity to add your proficiency bonus to all damage you deal with this and other attacks. Sort of the replacement of rage damage, to give an example. Oh, and I forgot this, indeed, Primal Blood and Primal Rest, which respectively respectively decrease and increase your primal limit, so that you can either go into primal easier or harder, to kind of give you a little bit of a choice of like how high risk, how reward do you want to play this build, right? That's the idea, really. Now, speaking of this, this immediately leads us into the subclasses. Now, we're going to start with, not this, with this. Path of the Berserker. Now, some of you might have already noticed that I brought the exhaustion thing in here, and some of you might have already, I think I even already said it during the video, but some of you might have already rightfully guessed that Path of the Berserker I have changed to really work with your primal state, because I will admit that the primal state was also partially inspired by the frenzy of Barbarian. So, what does that mean? The Path of the Berserker is a path that will actually, to a certain extent, try to get into frenzy. Or into primal, sorry. So, what happens is, starting at level 3, when you choose this subclass, you can let your primal power take over. Whenever you are primal, you can use your bonus action to make an additional attack. This is, for example, one of those subclasses where lowering your primal limit might be good, because you want to get into primal to get the additional bonus attack. Even more than that, you have resistant body, which starting at level 3 gives you advantage on constitution saving throws against exhaustion. This includes the primal save, right? Because that is a con save against exhaustion. So they have an easier time not taking the exhaustion levels from being in primal, so they can get the extra damage and they can get the bonus action attack with a little bit less risk. You're still probably going to end up having moments where you take levels of exhaustion depending on the amount of ferocity that you get, but that's how this currently works. Then Unending Spirit at level 6. Whenever you hit level 6 in this class, your Primal Fury allows you to fight through the pain. While you're a primal, you can ignore any effects from being exhausted. Again, an additional advantage. Technically, with the way I've written it now, and I honestly kind of like it, this means that even if you hit 10 exhaustion, you technically don't die until you go out of primal, which I think is a cool little, just a cool little tidbit. I don't know. I like it. I kind of want to keep it. But pretty much, again, the idea here is you want to get into primal, because then that exhaustion is not going to make you weaker. And I think that's a cool little thing. Primal Fear, starting at level 10, your Primal Fury makes even the toughest enemies shake in their boots. Whenever you make an attack against the target must make a wisdom save against a DC of 8, plus your proficiency bonus, plus your constitution modifier. A failure, target is now frightened of you until the end of their next turn. You can only use this feature once per turn, and only when you are primal. Again, trying to get into primal, and you can make people afraid of you. And then Retaliation, I pretty much kept starting at 14th level. When you take damage from a creature that is within 5 feet of you, you can use your reaction to make a melee weapon attack against that creature. The big reason that I still think Retaliation sort of fits in Barbarian is it gives you an additional attack, meaning it gives you an additional chance to get ferocity. So I still feel like this fits. Originally I was playing around with making this like, you can only do this when you're primal. I actually don't like that. I actually just like it being like this and being like sort of a little bit of a farm. to have an easier time to get to your primal state. So that would be Berserker. Excuse me. Second of all, Totem Warrior. I'm gonna be honest here. I've changed very little in Totem Warrior. I think I've literally changed one thing. And that's so for those of you who don't know how Totem Warrior works, right? At level 3 you can get beast sense and speak with animals, sure. But then you also get to choose a totem, right? So I've only put the bear, eagle, and wolves here. I didn't put the other ones. There's a couple ones that came out. I think with Tasha's. I don't even remember when they came out. The only one that I've changed is what I think a lot of people would call the problematic one, which is the level 3 bear totem, which originally just said while you're raging, you take half damage from everything except psychic damage. What I've made it is while raging, whenever you take damage, you can use your reaction to spend 1 ferocity and gain resistance to one of the damage types of that damage until the start of your next. Sort of still keep like the general resistance, but it's not as broken as it used to be, because you pretty much just have to have like 2 creatures with different damage types, and your barbarian can't resist both of them. Which I still think is a better solution than whatever the hell Wizards made off of it. But anyway, I think Wizards was like at the start of your long rest you can just choose a damage type, which that's so Dungeon Master dependent. I don't know. I think I like this more. Other than that, I'm gonna be honest, Eagle, Wolf is still the same. Aspects of the beasts I have not changed. Spirit Walker I have not changed. Totemic attunements I have not changed. Now, I'm gonna be honest, I've had a tough time with Totem Warrior. I find it a very tough subclass to change and balance. I'm gonna be honest. I've actually thought of just getting rid of it currently, because I'm not a big fan of... Well, no, I am a big fan of the subclass. That's not true. I am a big fan of the subclass. I just don't really know what I want to do with this subclass. I've been thinking that I want to have a subclass that maybe kind of tries to edge Primal, right? They don't want to become Primal, but the closer they get to their Primal limits, the more stuff that they can do, sort of. That's something that I've been thinking about, but that I don't feel like that fits Path of the Totem Warrior. So currently, this path has not changed whatsoever. I might also just leave it like this. There was very little that I really wanted to change here currently. If you guys have any ideas, by all means. This one I'm just relatively stuck on. I feel like I fixed the biggest issue with Bear. Still making it a good feature, but just a little less broken than it used to be. So yeah, that's my very short explanation of Totem Warrior. Finally, Zealot. Zealots, first of all, at level 3, they get Divine Fury. This is very similar to the original, but so you can channel Divine Fury into your weapon strikes. When you hit an enemy with a weapon attack, deal radiant or necrotic damage, your choice, equal to 1d6 plus half your barbarian level by spending 1 point of ferocity. You can only use this feature once per turn. Fairly simply put, I figured originally it was just like you can do this once per turn. I figured let's have you spend a point of ferocity for it, but instead of it having, because I think the original it had to be on your first attack or something. Now you can kind of choose when you want to do it. You can wait for a crit if you want to, if you're using this with a reckless attack, stuff like that. And then the level 3, honestly, I just like this feature. Like your soul is marked for endless battle. If a spell such as Raise Dead has the sole effect of restoring you to life, but not in death. The caster doesn't need material components. I don't know. I like this feature. I think this is a really neat feature. Kind of weird. Primal Focus has become you no longer lose all your ferocity when you would drop unconscious, which in the base rules of ferocity that is a thing. Zealots can stay ferocious even while they're unconscious. They don't lose everything. And then Zealous Presence. As a bonus action, you unleash a battle cry infused with divine energy. This used to be a once per... I don't know if it's short or long rest off the top of my head. It used to be once per rest, I think. Now what I've done is you can just do it whenever you want, but you have to spend 1 ferocity for each creature that you wish to affect with this feature. Excuse me. So, you know, if you have two allies that you want to affect, you have to spend 2 ferocity. 3, you have to spend 3 ferocity. Really, that's the idea. And other than that, it's just the same bonus action to do it. And any creatures of your choice within 60 feet of you that can hear you gain advantage on attack rolls and saving throw until the start of your turn. Start of your next turn, sorry. Easy enough. And Rage Beyond Death. I forgot to add at 14th level. This is supposed to be your 14th level feature. While you're raging, having 0 hit points doesn't knock you unconscious. You must still make death saving throws, and you suffer the normal effect of taking damage while at 0 hit points. However, if you would die due to failing death saving throws, you don't die until your rage ends, and you die then only if you still have 0 hit points. Originally, this is where the feature stopped. I still find it funny that Wizards didn't pick up on the fact that that technically makes Barbarians immortal at level 15. Because they can bonus action Rage and not lose it when they drop unconscious, I think. And technically, because your Rage at level 15 becomes infinite, there's no time limit on it anymore, you technically never die, which I find hilarious. So I added one small thing. For every hour that you are dead and raging, you have to spend a point of ferocity, so you don't have infinite death. To be fair, I think the idea is that even if you're dead, you can technically be cure wounds. I'd have to look up the ruling on that. And even then, you have stuff like, you know, because of Warrior of the Gods, you don't even need a bloody diamond. Or something like Raise Dead or Revivify. So it's like, you pretty much become immortal. Maybe I do need to change this feature. I'm not sure. I really like Rage Beyond Death, if I'm being honest. I might change this to 1 ferocity each round, to be perfectly honest. I'm not sure. That way you're still like feral, but you can like finish the combat. You are technically, by the way, able to gain ferocity while you're dead. So even then, technically, this is an infinite farm. So I might still need to change this feature. I'll look into that. But anyway, that is the full Barbarian, revised Barbarian. It's still a work in progress, as all of the classes are. But the biggest thing that I really wanted to showcase here was my, or well, MCDMs technically, and then with my changes, the Ferocious Battle feature that was added. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Please, by all means, share your opinions down in the comment section down below. Please tell me what you think. There's also a Discord in case people want to talk to me. I think the link is in the description as well. And other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you all next time. Bye, guys.